What is going on, Snooker fans, and welcome to the first Snooker Digest episode of 2025, where we will be reviewing last week's action at Ali Pali. And as always, the Masters served up another brilliant tournament with plenty of talking points. We had the last-minute withdrawal from the defending champion, an incredible first-round comeback, a 147, a missed 147, and it all ultimately ended with Shaun Murphy becoming a multiple Masters champion. But we will start briefly with O'Sullivan, who despite not playing in the event was still in the headlines after he pulled out 2 days before he was due to kick off the tournament against John Higgins. And there's been plenty of discussion about that decision, and I've seen a lot of comments both on social media and also on my last video that I do have to disagree with, and that is this sort of perception fans seem to have that players shouldn't be allowed to pull out of tournaments as it's disrespectful to fans. Now, I of course can appreciate the frustration of spending money on tickets, travel and even accommodation to go watch O'Sullivan play, only to find out he will no longer be in the event. But a player's well-being always has to come first, and if he wasn't in the right headspace to play, then that is ultimately his decision. And I would have expected O'Sullivan fans to be more concerned about him being okay mentally, rather than having just to go at him for doing what he felt was the right thing to do at the time. And I'm also sure some people thought it was odd for him to be doing punditry for Eurosport, but again, punditry work and the stress of playing are completely separate, and he should be allowed to make whatever choice he wants to. And whilst also on this topic briefly, I watched the tournament mainly on the BBC, but the chat between Ronnie and Selby on Eurosport about mental health of players and the need for there to be a mental health specialist on hand at events was very important. And I do hope it's something that World Snooker takes seriously, because yes, they apparently have this app which they can contact, which a player can contact a specialist sort of through the phone. But what Selby and O'Sullivan were talking about was the need for there to be someone physically there at venues to help. And Jason Ferguson did come across a tad dismissive of the subject when he was doing his own interview later in the week. But let's get on to the action that happened on the table, and the man that benefited the most from O'Sullivan's last-minute withdrawal was Robertson, who took his place after being 17th on the ranking list at the time the draw was made. Although do spare a penny for Zhao Guodong's thoughts, because he is currently 17th on the live ranking list, so he can consider himself very unlucky that it wasn't him who got the call-up. But naturally, I was very happy to see Neil get the call-up, and he made the most of it, didn't he, with that incredible comeback from 5-1 down against John Higgins. Now, briefly on John, it is really an unfortunate habit he's picked up to keep snatching defeat from the jaws of victory recently, because that loss to Robertson at the Tour Championship a couple of years ago isn't the only example of such a painful loss. But if we do turn our attention to Neil, probably the best we've seen him play from 5-1 down since maybe that Tour Championship final, to be honest. Of course, he won the English Open early in the season, and he has reached a couple of other quarterfinals, but the way that he came back was the most pleasing, because that is Neil Robertson at his absolute best. Unfortunately, he couldn't push on, and he didn't do an awful lot wrong in that quarterfinal really. Shaun Murphy was just a class above. So all in all, plenty of positives to take from his unexpected visit to Ali Pali, and it might just be that spark that he needed to ignite his season properly, because of course he still does need to pick up results to avoid qualifying for the World Championship again. Elsewhere, Judd Trump set a new record for the most amount of prize money won in a single season, and he's done it in January, which is absurd really. Of course, this was helped by winning $500,000 in Saudi Arabia, but ultimately it just represents his remarkable consistency. The dream of winning all 3 Triple Crowns events in a single season is over, but I'm sure he won't be too disappointed about that. His game is in such good shape, and whilst he did make some errors early on in that semi-final against Kyren, there was very little he could have done in those last 4 frames, to be honest. He talked a lot about pacing himself this season, so we may well see him not enter a couple of tournaments over the next few months as he starts to prepare himself for a possible second world title in the spring, but it's hard to imagine he won't be picking up more titles between now and the season end. I mentioned in my preview of the tournament that Mark Selby hadn't reached a Masters semi-final since 2014, and incredibly, that run continues despite a really strong opening round performance against Ali Carter. Now, he then went on to lose 6-2 to Mark Allen in the quarters, but that scoreline doesn't paint the picture of how that match went at all. There were at least 3, maybe 4 really close frames, and Allen won every single one of them, which, is a testament to Mark Allen, because we know how difficult Selby is to beat when frames go tactical. But it should also be noted that Allen did get a very generous run of the ball in that match as well. But even still, it was a match that probably should have been a whole lot closer than it actually was. I still think though there are positive signs for Selby and his fans, and if things start clicking for him soon, he could go very, very close in Sheffield. And just mentioning Mark Allen a little bit more, he of course was my pre-season and pre-tournament prediction for this title. And things started very well, but he just ran into an unstoppable Shaun Murphy in the semi-final, so he can't really have too many complaints overall. However, it is worth mentioning that he has now made it to 5 consecutive semi-finals, so despite having a pretty slow start to the season, he has found that consistency again, which has been helped by not only that tough match player that he has become, but he also seemed to find some fluency this week in a similar vein to Neil Robertson, so he'll be pretty confident of getting some more silverware in the second half of the season. But now to the 2 finalists, starting with the runner-up Kyren Wilson, displaying again how well he is adapting to his tag as a reigning world champion. I've seen a lot of first-time world champions in my lifetime really struggle. Players like Luke Brissell, Neil Robertson, Stuart Bingham, Peter Ebdon all didn't have the best of seasons after winning a maiden world title, certainly not to the level, nowhere near the level Kyren is enjoying. And he really does seem to raise his game against Judd Trump, doesn't he? OK, Judd beat him comfortably at the UK Championship last month, but Kyren's now got 3 massive victories against the world number 1 this season, and every time he has played right at the top of his game as well. Ultimately, it is a second Masters final that he's been on the wrong side of, but the positives from this week and this season in general far outweigh the negatives of that loss, so I don't think he'll be disappointed for too long. But we end, as always, with the champion, and as the cliche goes, the best man really did win last week. His final 3 performances against Neil, Allen and Wilson were some of the finest displays the magician has ever produced. I would still argue that the best he has ever played was in 2015 when he won the first Masters title, and then he got to the World Championship final a few months later. Those were just blistering performances of brutal, consistent long potting. But as everyone in commentary kept mentioning, this was the most focused Shaun has perhaps ever looked, and you do have to praise Peter Ebdon massively for that. His all-round match play was superb, and that is something you never ever say about Shaun Murphy. His career has always been built about his ability to pot and score, but even in the tactical side of things he kept coming out on top last week, and to finish off that final the way he did after Kyren threatened a comeback was really the icing on the cake. Not only did he win the title, but he of course also made a 147, something he said was a major goal of his at the start of the season, and he of course done it just after making a complete mess of a chance to make one in the match before. So it really was the complete performance from him. He's now the 12th man to win multiple Masters titles, and he will be so interesting to see what level he can produce in Sheffield, because that was the kind of performance a world champion produces. And I think it should also be mentioned that he's probably proved a few naysayers, me included I should add, who constantly have question marks about him doing commentary work whilst playing in tournaments on the BBC. It certainly didn't distract him this week, which may just have made this win even sweeter. And yeah, overall, another fantastic edition of this tournament. One small criticism maybe is the lack of deciding frames we had. We only had 2 deciders and they came within the first 3 matches of the tournament, but we still had plenty of drama and the standard in general was very, very high from all the players. But no one played as well as Shaun Murphy, and like I say, he was deservedly the 2025 Masters champion.